Can you imagine what it'd be like if you couldn't hear at all during training or in competition? How would that impact your sport and your ability to compete? For some people, this is the daily experience of their everyday lives and a real challenge that they face in a world that so often revolves around being able to hear. Imagine never hearing the encouragement of the coach, or the instructions of your captain, or the roar of the crowd. Not hearing is difficult and challenging, that those who can hear can only begin to empathise with. And yet, when it comes to the most important message of all, the good news of Jesus Christ, so many sports people today, even though they may physically hear their coach or the captain, have never heard the good news of Jesus explained to them. Many go through their sporting careers without hearing someone explain about Jesus from the Bible to them. How can they even begin to understand who he is if they don't get a chance to hear? In Paul's letter to the Romans, in chapter 10, he helps us see this clearly. Let's have a look at verses 12 and 13. It says this, "For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." Although some of us may have had bad experiences of hearing the gospel explained in a public setting, here we see that God uses people to proclaim his word, and he uses his word to save people. The passage starts with great encouragement, doesn't it? Verse 12. That though all have rejected God, God richly blesses those who call on him. And what is that blessing? Well, in verse 13 we find out. All who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. Now, Paul is quoting here from the Old Testament, the prophet Joel, who is pointing forward to a time when God will save people from his right judgment. And Paul is saying that that time is now. That saving is through Jesus Christ. I wonder if your sports friends know their disconnection from God, the judgment that is coming, and their need to be saved. If not, why not? Is it because we just haven't told them? Imagine that you knew that the world has a terminal disease and that there was a cure, and you knew where to find it. Wouldn't you be shouting it from the rooftops, pleading with people to come and be saved? And yet so often we lose sight of the need and the urgency that our sports friends face. Or we feel inadequate or embarrassed about pointing them to Jesus. Well, if that's you, look at verses 14 to 15 with me. Paul says, "How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent?" These are powerful and penetrating questions that Paul asks of us as Christian sports people. They are a series of rhetorical questions through which Paul considers the kind of chain of events necessary for a person to be saved. Let's take a look at them, because the logic of these verses is, well, really quite clear. The first thing we see is that people will call on Jesus to save them only if they believe he can do so. That makes sense, doesn't it? They'll only call on him to save them if they believe he can. Secondly, belief in Jesus Christ cannot exist without knowledge about him. People need to know the gospel. Thirdly, a person hears about Jesus only when someone tells them the saving message. And fourthly, the message will not be told unless people are encouraged to go and tell others. It makes sense, doesn't it? It's logical, the flow. This is why Paul is so urgent about spreading the good news. The good news about Jesus to the ends of the earth. You see, Paul believed that the only way to be saved was to hear and believe in the gospel. I wonder if that's you too. I wonder if you feel the same way. A friend of mine used to work for the company Coca-Cola. And he once told me that the leaders of Coca-Cola had a very simple vision of what a better future looked like for them and for their brand. They wanted to take this soft drink, this new soft drink, and put it within arm's length of everyone on the planet. They wanted everybody in the whole world to be only an arm's length away from being able to access and get a Coke. Hey look, what we have in Jesus is so much better than a drink, isn't it? So much better. And surely our heart as Christians is the same. Wouldn't it be fantastic if every sports person on the planet had the opportunity to hear and respond to the message about Jesus Christ? For that to happen, it requires us to know the message and to tell the message of Jesus. Take a look right now at your feet. How would you describe them? As a sports person, our feet are often battered and worn from the constant use as we compete and play. Not something you really want to spend much time looking at. And yet, do you see the quote Paul makes in verse 15 from the Old Testament prophet Isaiah? It's from Isaiah 52 verse 7, which refers to those who bring the good news to those in captivity of their imminent release. So this is joyful news. So marvellous is this message. So beautiful are these words to those who need to hear them, that Isaiah says, and Paul echoes, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. You see, feet carry messengers. They carry messages to their destinations. And since salvation comes only through hearing the good news about Jesus, the feet of those who bring the message about Jesus Christ are beautiful. So a clear goal of the Christian sports person is to be someone with beautiful feet. I'm not talking about polished nails and pampered toes, or even the latest running shoes or basketball boots, but for you to have beautiful feet because you are committed to giving every sports person you share life with the opportunity to hear and respond to Jesus. But how? Well, look at verse 17. Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. You see, what Paul does here is he sums up his argument so far. A person can come to faith only through hearing the gospel, and the specific message that must be heard is the word of Christ. That is the good news about Jesus Christ as the crucified and risen Saviour. So the question for us is, how do I help the sports people I share life with hear the word of Christ so they have an opportunity to respond? Well, here are two very simple ways. Number one, pray for, look for opportunities yourself to point them to Jesus Christ and what he has done for them. But secondly, how about inviting your sports friends to church or to an event where they will have the opportunity to hear and respond to Jesus? This may be an event run by a church or one you facilitate that is specific to sports people, at which you invite someone to share the word of Christ. Bringing your sports friends to an opportunity to hear God's message in an environment in which they will listen is a great way to engage them with the good news of Jesus. Hey look, although it can be daunting to tell people about Jesus or to ask our sports friends to come to a Christian event, Nothing is more thrilling than seeing our sports friends engage with the good news of Jesus Christ. So there you go, plenty to think about. But please see clearly and carefully our role in being beautiful feet in taking the message of Jesus to the world of sport.